Typically, when you play video games, you play them for two reasons. But really, these two reasons go hand in hand and become one. So, first, you play them to relax after having done many tasks through the day, and secondly, you play them to experience new stories, themes, and adventures, which helps broaden your horizons. I mean, yeah, they literally do both go hand in hand, but that's not the topic for today's video. Today, I'll be talking about how I get to relax and digest these games. Some people just hop on for 2 minutes and get bored, whilst others see playing games as a task, a job even, putting way too much pressure on playing games when they really shouldn't. These two feelings, although the first one might be a bit badly explained, are what I feel are the result of games being located on two ends of the spectrum. The easy or boring bottom, or the strenuous and long top. But not everything is black and white, because these two ends do meet in the middle, and that is what we'll be calling the sweet spot for playing video games. The sweet spot is, well, it's kinda hard to explain, but also not that complex to actually really explain. Basically, it's the feeling you get when you are playing a game that you are progressing at your own pace. The game is respecting your time and skill, and in turn, you respect the game and what it's trying to create. It's this area where you are being challenged by the game, but the challenge is not so easy that you go into autopilot or too hard that you never want to touch it ever again. However, it's hard for games to create a universal sweet spot that applies to every single person, because everyone is different and how they play varies really from person to person. Some like to play shorter games like a Resident Evil, for example, while some want to spend literal days in the game like a Final Fantasy. So what are these sweet spots in certain games, and how do they keep us engaged? I touched upon difficulty. If a game is too easy, you feel like you aren't being rewarded for what you accomplish. And if it's too hard, you feel it's broken and unfair and that the game is just, gimmicky, I guess. These two feelings are what construct your enjoyment of the game, and games try to tread a middle ground. And maybe even trying not to be right in the center, but just at the edges of the area. Take Mario games, for example. They're meant to be accessible for everyone, fun levels with a clear goal in mind, specifically Mario Odyssey, where to progress the game you need to collect moons. Now, there are some moons that are in plain sight throughout the game, and if the whole game was just like that, it wouldn't be as fun. But because there are moons that go out of you, that to get them you have to go out of your way to encourage you to think up some creative ways to get them, or encourage you to overcome a difficult task, it balances out the difficulty aspect of the game, and bring it right into the middle, where inexperienced players can rely on the easy moons and try their hand at the harder ones, whilst experienced players will feel challenged by the difficult moons, which creates a kind of universal sweet spot. There are games that do in fact only apply to certain groups, the extremes, the hardcore players, and the beginner players. If you gave a young child a copy of Dark Souls, they'd probably get really frustrated and that would have left a bad taste in them for future games. If you give an experienced player, on the other hand, a copy of Pokemon Sword, for instance, they'd find the game to be wasting their own time for not challenging them at all. In these cases, the difficult games are better because they encourage you to get better at the game, whilst an easy game isn't really challenging you in the slightest. So, how do you try to make games more accessible to all players? Well, difficulty options. But this then causes more problems. You could play a game on easy, but because it's labeled as easy, you feel less accomplished and rewarded for playing the game, and sometimes hard mode is just straight up too hard for you. So how do you create a game whose difficulty can apply to a wide range of players, which is a normal mode? Well, you change the difficulty whilst the player actually plays the game without telling them. So you adapt the difficulty, that's what I mean. And this is where a masterpiece of a game comes in and shows us how it's done, which is namely Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 4 is without a doubt one of the best games of all time and one of the best Resident Evil games. Along with that, and that comes without saying, the gameplay and controls hold up today and the graphics are still quite impressive, but beneath the game is so much more. When you start up the game, you are given the difficulty choice of normal, which is the only choice until you beat the game, where you then unlock the hard mode, which is professional. So you might be thinking, yeah, one difficulty and it's normal, so I'm going to experience the game how it was intended. Now, depending on how well you do in the game in terms of deaths, the game changes slightly beneath your eyes. Resident Evil 4's difficulty adapts to your playstyle and how well you are doing. Too easy? Here, this will make it harder. Too hard? Well, we'll actually take some of it away. There is a certain room known as the water room, and I got overflooded there because enemies kept spawning in left and right. I retried over and over again until suddenly I made it through, with relative ease as well. It was like, wow, I really did it. It was then I remembered that I'd watched a video on Resident Evil 4 and its difficulty, that I remembered that it actually changes, and then I realized that the archers that had been standing in the back making it more difficult for me, were gone. The game saw that I was struggling, gave me some rope, and then I got through, without taking away from the core experience. I really don't know if all games have this system, but I do believe that Resident Evil 4 started it, and perfected it. This doesn't just make the sweet spot more accessible, but expands it so that a wide range of people can enjoy the game by having a challenge that is based around their own skill level. But before you can even get to this part, you must create a world and story that intrigues people, which is where the narrative aspect of this state comes in. Sure, you can make a game have the best gameplay of all time, but if the story is not so appealing, you fall out of this enjoyment that you initially had. Personally, I think this might be a hot take, for me it was Doom 2016. I really loved its gameplay, but towards the later levels, the story and world weren't really cutting it for me. And I've put the game on hold until I feel like beating it again, and that's how it should be. You should just put it on hold until you should not force yourself to play games, but yeah, that's for another video. I think that's how you should play games. Don't force yourself to finish them. Play them if you enjoy it and leave it for later. But that's another topic. I've repeated myself. Wow, I tried to go on a tangent and I've now repeated the script, but yeah, back to narratives. I feel like, especially in recent times, games have had a bigger emphasis on the narrative, and in turn we get a cinematic experience, like Naughty Dog games, or games where the plot is constantly thrown at you, like Kingdom Hearts. What I'm saying is that the narrative has become more important now compared to the past, and the narrative also needs to fall into the middle ground of not being too complex to understand, and not too easy and uninteresting that it throws you out of it. Take Final Fantasy VII Remake, where, big spoilers for Final Fantasy VII Remake, they changed the timeline of the game's universe, and that the original timeline has been broken because we managed to defeat the original timeline, which were the wisp creatures that in the game that were there to try to keep it in place, but we broke it. I guess that is this is a reimagining of sorts, but once I finish the game, and especially if it's a narrative-driven game, I like to think about the story, its themes, the characters, the journey they went on. But for Final Fantasy VII Remake, as much as I love the game, I was just confused, and I did think about the game story, but not the way that I hoped. Thinking rather, how on earth are they going to be able to make this alternate reality timeline dimension Nomura shenanigans work? Like, for a narrative to be grounded and remains interesting for ourselves is that it can't be unrealistic in the context of the game. I've said this before, but imagine Resident Evil 2, and instead of a zombie coming at you, you had a gorillas with an AK coming at you. It doesn't make sense in our world, nor the world the game that is set in. And that is how I feel FF7 Remake's story ends. It isn't grounded in its world. The game story isn't itself. And that is what is hard for game narratives. They need to be easy to understand, but complex and thought-provoking enough to keep the player engaged. Let's take, in my opinion, the best narrative-driven game, in my opinion, The Last of Us Part 2. Controversial pick? Yeah, but listen. Oh, and, we can't really talk about the game without mentioning spoilers, so there's a spoiler warning. The Last of Us 2 story carries on directly from the first game, and things look good right until you get to the golf club moment, where we are introduced to our main problem of the game. Ellie has just seen her father figure get brutally taken out by an unknown person with a golf club, and we see that Ellie is out for revenge. She leaves her peaceful life behind her, and instead of mourning the natural way, she wants to take matters into her own hands. The premise of the plot here, and I'm really not going to lie, is really simple. It's just bare bones simple even. Death leads to denial, which then goes into anger, into bargaining, and then depression. It's just a simple revenge plot, really. Ellie progresses with the 4 stages of grief throughout the game, and it is how Naughty Dog presents the story we learn and understand her suffering. And the ending, is left for us to think about whether she has reached the final stage, acceptance. Even when the narrative shifts to Ellie, the plot there is also simple. Abby gets flashbacks from her father's death and works for the Washington Liberation Force, I think it was, and saves others. These two narratives culminate together, and we get to see the ending from both of their stories, and because we have experienced both their pains and sufferings and their journeys, we are left with an ending that is deep for us to think whether it is right for us to take a life for a life, or that we should take our sufferings and not bear them alone, but try and open up to others, because in the end, we're alone one way or the other. And all of this started from a simple revenge plot. The story starts out in the middle of the of the sweet spot. Really, it's easy for us to stand, and as it progresses, we are left with an ending that we might not like, but deep down, we know that this isn't our story, it's Ellie's, and we finish the story right in the sweet spot. I'm not really sure how to transition from The Last of Us 2 storytelling to the next area, but enjoyment factor, yay. You see, the gameplay and narrative do mean a lot to keep the player engaged and try their best to retain the player's enjoyment, but if you don't like playing the game, even if it may have the most refined gameplay mechanics ever or a story on par with Don Quixote, if you don't really like it, the sweet spot will never be achieved. This is, well, difficult for developers to create. Really, universal difficulty like in Resident Evil 4 won't help you if you don't like the game, and The Last of Us story wouldn't help if you don't like the game. Liking the game, that's what it comes down to. This is what makes or breaks it for you, and fortunately I have an example for that. I mean, it's not really a popular opinion, but I'll say it. I did not enjoy The Witcher 3, which is why I haven't finished it. Don't worry, I'll finish it someday, but as of right now I don't want to. I know the combat is good, not too challenging, but not too easy. I'm aware of how good the story can be, but I can't seem to find the motivational pleasure from it. Maybe it is because I'm burnt out from 30 plus hour long games, maybe it's because I've been playing a lot of shorter titles recently, but this category, the enjoyment factor, is unique to everyone. That's just how we as humans are. We aren't all expected to enjoy the same things, dislike the same things, say the same things. We're all different, and games try to tell that. In their opening areas, if you're willing to stick through Persona 5's long tutorial, the game is most definitely for you. That's what tutorials are for, letting you know what is next to come, and if you don't like it, you can drop out and maybe return some other time. I'm not sure how I'm going to conclude this video, but it's this state of mind that we have when playing. Following the characters on screen, overcoming challenges, in the end is all unique to ourselves. Personal feelings might make us enjoy something more than others, but when trying to come across what this is, they're always trying to keep you invested, and in the end we should feel like we aren't actually doing it, but we're enjoying it through a nice progression, increase, and a gripping story, because that's when you know that you've hit the sweet spot.